Another episode of Harvesting Jackson's Best, powered by Harvest Solar. If you're new here, this is a weekly segment on WKHM to highlight the incredible people and businesses that are the foundation of our great community. I'm your host, Jennifer Gallant from Harvest Solar, joined today with Bill White. Welcome.
Hi.
How are you?
Very good, and I'm very honored and happy to be here.
Yes, so who are you? What do you do? Tell us about yourself.
Well, let's see. Where shall I start? I don't want to bore people, but I'll just mention that I've been a realtor in the Jackson vicinity area since 1976, so that's over 46 years ago, full-time. And currently I'm an associate broker with Howard Hanna Real Estate and Mortgage Services in Jackson. But the reason I'm here today is I've been asked by the Michigan Heritage Military Museum to represent them as that I'm a newly appointed board member.
Amazing. So how does one, is that how it works? They ask you, they find you in the community and say, hey, can you come be on our board? How does that work?
Well, actually, I'm a product of Grass Lake. Don't hold that against me, but I've grown up there in most of my life, other than when I was in the service and excuse me, when I went to college. I actually started school in California. But and I'm very sad to say that even though I used to drive by the former museum facility, which was in Grass Lake, I never stopped there. I never went in. I didn't have any idea of what it was about. Well, Scott Garrick, who is the president of the board, called me to assist them in finding a new facility. So that's how I became associated with the museum. And then my first meeting was at the museum in Grass Lake, and I was completely blown away. I thought they just have I'm sorry, I shouldn't say this, but I just thought they might have a lot of junk piled around. Not only did they have some very interesting items, but the way it was displayed was so professional, and I just was awestruck. And so I really put myself into finding them a facility, which we did. The great part about it is that we located a facility that was on a historic site, Camp Blair, which was back in the days of the Civil War, and I wasn't alive then, but back in those days, that was a transitioning center where people going off to war would come and people coming back from the war would muster out there. So that was kind of cool. But the museum now is larger, and if you haven't seen the Michigan Military Museum, you really owe it to yourself to get a real good sense of history. And these people, and I haven't yet because I haven't been a member that long of the board, but they have put their heart and soul in it, and it's really a great facility.
That's wonderful. Now, where is it located now?
311 North Wisner, which is on Wisner Street. It would be just north of
Is that Wildwood?
Wildwood,
okay.
Right? And it would be west of, on the west side of the street.
Nice. So how awesome is it that we have this in town? And like you said, I don't think a lot of people even realize that it's here. What can you expect, and how do we come see this? You know, are there open times, or do you have to call and make an appointment?
That's a good question. Actually, they're open to the public on Wednesdays, Saturdays, excuse me, and Sundays. And so you don't need an appointment. You can just go there. It's staffed with people, and
that's fabulous. What is one thing there that really stuck out to you most?
Well, when I first saw the museum, when it was located in Grass Lake, Scott was giving me the tour, and he was pointing out citations, awards, uniforms of people that I knew in Grass Lake, having grown up there. Some of the old people that were in business, and for example, my neighbor, who was worked at the lumber yard, and I worked at the Grass Lake lumber yard for a short period of time after I got out of high school, Wayne Havens. the Silver Star during the Korean War. I didn't know that. So I learned it when I was at the museum, and it was just like, wow.
I know that guy.
Yeah.
That's awesome.
Yes.
So why do you feel like having, you've seen a lot of things happen in the world,
Yes.
being around for a little bit of time. Why do you feel like something like this is important to maintain and educate people and show people, these were local people, like you just said, your friend that you didn't even know had gone and done this and received this award? And why is that important to be teaching to the youth and passing that information along?
Well, history is very important, and every country that's ever existed has good history and it has bad history. We're, through the museum, presenting a good part of history that's very important for young people to know. To know the sacrifices that people before them made for our country in the different wars and that kind of thing. And I have to be careful. My wife's an educator, and my daughter now is an educator, so I don't want to say anything negative about school systems or teachers, because teachers are really unsung heroes. Because I remember when my wife changed careers and became an educator, the amount of work that she put in after the school day. And, they say teachers get off during the summers. Well, she didn't. And any teacher, I have a niece that's a teacher also, and it's a passion. It's more than a paycheck. So, but I don't know that time is being spent on historical facts that need to be. And there's a real overview of history there. Civil War. I have had a great-great-grandfather that was a Union soldier, lived in East Tennessee, and that was a Union part of Tennessee. There was a prisoner of war during the Civil War at Andersonville. And, of course, that was a horrible place, and not many people made it out of there. And so I have an interest in the Civil War, and I have a real interest in World War II as well. When I was a kid, I couldn't get enough books about World War II. I really liked that. So I think history is important to understand the sacrifices that people made to leave home and be gone for years sometimes, and what they had to go through and what they saw. So it's important.
Absolutely. I think a huge thing is, I don't know if this is even the right word to say, but the privilege that we have now, where we're not forced to be enlisted, right fresh out of high school or whatever it may be, 16, 18. A lot of these men were just sent off, and they're kids. They're sent off to fight for our country and make these sacrifices, like you said, and a lot of them didn't come back. So having this Military Heritage Museum right here, where I'm sure the people that are involved are passionate about it and it touches their heart. They either served or their family served, and it's important to them. And that's where I feel like the real rich knowledge comes from, when it's so personal and they want to share these stories. And I think that's really awesome that we have that. And I want to take my kids there. That's something that's special, and it's right here in town. That's huge.
Back in the early part of the summer, I stopped by for some reason I can't remember, but I saw a Japanese man with his looked to be three, I'm sure, as I recall, three young boys touring that. Very somber, very quiet, but they were, as you know, on the other side of the fence during World War II, but they were there looking at the history part. And it's a great, in fact, in Michigan we have, I believe, 2 aviation museums, and we have a Medal of Honor museum, but we don't really have a military museum in the state, as far as I know. And so it's kind of unique. Great, it's one of those real, I have a marketing slogan on my real estate business that I've used for years. I sell Jackson. And there's a lot of real jewels in Jackson. Back in the early 80s when interest rates were going high, and there was you'd see, the last one leaving Jackson, turn out the lights. Jackson's really made a comeback, I think. And there's a lot of jewels here. The Michigan Heritage Military Museum is one of them, one
Absolutely.
of many.
This is one thing I feel like I say this every single week, and I love having the position to do this show is because half of these businesses and people and nonprofits that are operating here in town, I didn't even know existed here, and it's like, how did I not know that this awesome, great thing was right here in Jackson? And so I feel so lucky and honored to be here, especially with you talking about another great piece of Jackson that's right here, and it's rich in history and it's huge. We need to be keeping things like this around and passing on this information to our kids so that, like you said, some things get lost when it comes to school and what they choose to teach. And so I just think it's super awesome that we have this here. And I'm excited to go check it out.
Well, people will ask me from time to time, I'll run into somebody I haven't seen in a while, and they'll say, I just can't believe you're still working in a real estate business, straight commission, and all the people you have to deal with. What keeps you in the business? And it's very easy for me to answer. I have met the most remarkable and interesting people in my business. I mean, in fact, this very weekend, I don't want to get into too much detail, but I showed a commercial business that I had from people from out of town. And one of the parties that was attending was a guy that looked like a tradesman, a heavy equipment operator. He had a Caterpillar hat on and a Carhartt jacket and unshaven, kind of shaggy hair. And when I got out of the Army, I worked 5.5 years for a commercial masonry contractor out of the Ann Arbor local as a laborer. And so I felt some kinship there. So I got talking, what do you do? Do you drive a dozer? He said, well, no, I retired when I was 43. And I won't say the business, but he said it was the largest this type of business in the country. Mm-hmm. And so we got talking, and his story, what an entrepreneur, and just what he built and what he ended up selling and what he's doing now, it's amazing. And I can go on and on about the people that I've met through my vocation in Jackson that just people don't realize what kind of interesting, successful people are in Jackson. And even if they're just and I shouldn't say just, but if they're farmers or if they work in it doesn't matter. They're just interesting, good people. That's what I love. That's what keeps me in the business.
I think it's fascinating that, I feel like you are the perfect type of person to have on a board because, like you said, you have 40 plus years experience with mortgages and selling, being involved in that process. The amount of people that you just talked about that you've met, and I also think it's fascinating that you describe this man, and I'm sitting here right now with Bill, and he looks dapper. He is dressed up in a suit and tie, and you're describing this man that he probably is looking at you like we have nothing in common.
Little did he know.
Yes, that's what's so cool is that I feel like we're all connected in some way, and just having those conversations and making that connection and your network, expanding that just by asking him those questions like, who are you? I'm curious about what you've done and where you're going, and you retired at 43. What is your secret? That's amazing.
Oh, it is. I tell people that when I used to be a broker owner and I managed the Howard Hanna real estate operation in Jackson, which I do not anymore, but I would tell agents I would train, if you're dressed professionally and if you're punctual, you have an edge on your competition right away because that's not always the case. Mm-hmm. Just to go back, and I'll give his name now because he's been passed away for years, but he was a pastor at the Free Methodist Church, or had been a pastor, Bruce Melms. And when I met him, we were talking. He was a prisoner of war for 2 years during World War II. And I said, oh my gosh. He said, Bill, those are the best 2 years of my life. And I just went, what? But he meant it. It was his passion because of what he was able to do for others in being incarcerated like that.
Wow.
Just amazing.
That is amazing. And I also want to say thank you for your service as well.
You're welcome.
That's, that's what a sacrifice. And without all of these brave men and women sacrificing their time, their life, possibly their life, and their time at home with their families and things like that, where would we be now? Who knows? So
I haven't in a while, but if you ever watch any YouTube Medal of Honor stories, it's amazing what these people have done, what they've gone through. So we're trying to capture that at the Michigan Heritage Military Museum, and really, again, I'll just promote it by saying if you haven't seen it, you really owe it to yourself and if your children, if you have it, to go there.
absolutely.
To see.
And I'm sure it's not just a one-time trip. It sounds like there's a lot to take in and a lot of really high-value information and just interesting things to look at. And I'm, like you said, the medals, and what else is there? What else can we look out for?
Uniforms, guns, citation. In fact, I just got a call from the president today to say that there was a Army unit, I think it's in Alabama, that donated a cannon for the museum, which will be posted out front, and it was used during World War I.
Wow.
So that's pretty cool.
That's amazing. So is that how these items are acquired, by donation?
Yes. All of the stuff down there is donated by people. And they have a circa World War I believe, ambulance. And they have like setups of what a hospital, emergency hospitals would look like. I mean, there's just so much there. It's overwhelming. And you're right. It's more than a one-day trip. I mean, you can go there and get a good sense of things in an afternoon, but I mean to dig deep. For example, are you familiar with Captain Sparks?
Yep.
Sparks Withington and all that. His Medal of Honor is there on display.
Wow, that's super cool.
And then I had a client over the summer when I was in their house. I noticed this award on the wall, and we got talking, and it was Mr. Sellers' uncle who won the Distinguished Service Cross, which is the second highest award for valor you can get in the Army. And he was killed in action during World War I. And so they actually have a road at Fort Benning or Fort Bragg named after him for the man that was killed. And I believe that the nephew said that there are 5,000 war dead buried in this particular cemetery in France, and only 5, and it was a brutal battle, and I can't remember the name of the battle, but only 5 Distinguished Service Cross members or awardees.
That, it just is, it's sad, it's so sad that these things had to happen and wars even happen. And I know I probably sound like a broken record saying that, but it just is crazy.
War is an inevitability, unfortunately.
I know, and it's
where you have human beings, because you used a word which I had to come back to, describing me as a perfect person to be on a board, but I was going to say, if my wife listens to this, she would say I'm far from perfect, but it's because human beings are imperfect, there will always be conflict. So that's important that we have people willing to make a sacrifice, and we need to have a country that's strong to be able to deter people, evildoers that would do us harm.
And to all current, past, present, anyone that served, thank you so much for your service. I mean, I don't feel like even just saying thank you is good enough, but thank you. Like, I wish I could give you the world, because...
Well, what's really tough for the current generation, and during, for example, Vietnam, a soldier would go there for a year. That would be their tour of duty. Then if they made it, they would be rotated back to the United States. But these kids nowadays, they're doing multiple tours, or have been, in Afghanistan and Iraq. They're doing multiple tours.
Mm-hmm.
They'll go and 3, 4, 5 tours of duty. That's a big sacrifice, especially for the families.
Yeah.
The wife and children, or husband and children left behind.
Absolutely. That's tough. That's really tough. And I do feel like it is a different time just with technology and being able to communicate a little bit more than what I'm sure it was like 40 plus years ago, where you see your loved one go off, your son, your husband, your nephew, whoever it may be, and you don't really hear back. You don't hear back if they are okay for a long time.
Yes.
So I can't imagine. I can't imagine. Ugh.
Well, hopefully you'll never have to experience that, or anyone that's a loved one.
Yeah, and thank you to everyone that is sacrificing that, because I don't know if I could. I don't know if I could, but I guess if I had to, I would, But if I have the choice, which is why I feel privileged now, is that you do have the choice to decide if you want to put your, risk your life for your country and go.
Well, I've heard and read a lot of stories that after 9/11, that a lot of young men and women were compelled to volunteer for the service for their country.
Mm-hmm.
And that really didn't have to, and they just said they just needed to do that.
Yeah, that's amazing.
Yes, absolutely.
That's amazing. So I have a question.
Yes.
Say I have some cool memorabilia or, things from my family sitting at home, and I feel like I want to donate it, and is that something that you guys find value in, or is that something that is even an option if you have something like this from your family, like their service, and maybe stories from local people that their family has served and they want to get their story out there?
Yeah, because the focus is on veterans from Michigan and people that have served. It's about Michigan.
Mm-hmm.
So it would depend. I would suggest that you contact the museum. They have Facebook page, web page, phone number, and just tell them what you have. They don't want to get into a lot of redundancy, for example. But, it's all about Michigan veterans. So, and especially, the closer to Jackson, too, it's, a good thing.
Yeah, and I think an interesting point that you mentioned earlier is that, you've had conversations with people and you didn't even realize, like, the pastor who was a prisoner of war for 2+ years. They have this history and these stories, and you didn't even know it, and they're just existing here regular. And I would have never guessed that about, my pastor, had they had this information and this life experience that, not that you can relate to, but if you've served, I'm sure it hits home more that, oh my goodness, I have a little bit better taste of what you might have gone through, having been in the service and done that. That's crazy.
Here's another story. I was on a listing appointment several years ago, and I didn't know the people. I was recommended. I went there. A gentleman answered the door. I would, at the time, probably late 80s. Cardigan sweater, right out of Father Knows Best kind of thing. Very gracious gentleman introduced me to his wife, and we talked. And I said, well, let's look at the house. And we were going through, we went into his office, and it was very apparent that he was an award winner in the military. And I didn't know what, but for example, I saw a Silver Star that he won. I saw the Distinguished Flying Cross, which is the second highest award for valor given in the Air Force.
Wow.
And a picture of him, and he was a full colonel. And so I, stopped thinking about real estate, started talking about his career. And he was a SR-71 pilot for the CIA. And there's very few and far between that you're going to meet a CIA pilot that worked for, or that flew an SR-71, which is the Blackbird.
Wow.
Supersonic, and just a very humble man. But he told me stories that I'm not really comfortable talking on the air about, but I'll suffice it to say this. He was in World War II as an enlisted man at the tail end of the war as an aircraft mechanic. And after the war, he started taking flying lessons, and they discovered that he had this innate ability to fly anything as long as he could get in and visualize the cockpit and understand where everything was. And because of that, he got in the CIA. And he was a colonel only because he had to be at different Air Force bases. He had to have some kind of rank, so they just made him a full colonel. But he actually worked in Jackson as an engineer, and then every now and then they would call on him to do a special mission.
Wow.
So he's still alive. I don't want to disclose his name or anything, but we get back to remarkable people you meet. You go into a 2-story colonial, which is a, kind of a typical house in Jackson, and here's this guy that was a real hero.
And he's just wearing a sweater, looking like your everyday man.
Yeah. The only thing he didn't have is a pipe.
Oh.
I thought would see a pipe come out.
Wow, that is extremely interesting.
Mm-hmm.
And he was allowed to tell you he was flying for the CIA?
Well, he'd been retired, but he had all this stuff in there.
That's awesome.
He said there are stories obviously I can't tell you, and I said, and I'm the nosiest person you'll ever meet. So I made a couple of attempts, but not.
I think that's another thing that is fascinating and mind-blowing to me, is that the stories these people have and the experiences they've gone through, and they just carry that baggage with them for the rest of their life. And, after you leave the military, the Air Force, or the Navy, whatever it may be, you're just expected to go back to a regular life, and I do think that veterans and people like that need more support, and they need help. That's a lot to carry.
It is, and when I was growing up, going in high school, of course, all my friends' parents were World War II veterans, but you really didn't know about it because they didn't talk about it. Mm-hmm. And you would find out years later when there was an obituary of one of them, and they'd say, well, so-and-so served with the 2nd Armored Cav and was, you didn't know about it. And you didn't hear discussion about PTSD, which you are now, which is very real. Mm-hmm. And because of what a young mind, you pull a young 18-year-old or 19-year-old out of Grass Lake, for example, or Jackson, and all of a sudden they're in a brutal war zone, that has a very negative effect on your mind. So it's being recognized now, and I think more attention is given to it, and, folks like that are getting the therapy. Mm-hmm. I graduated from high school with a guy, he passed away a few years ago, and he won 2 Bronze Stars and 2 Purple Hearts and the Army Air Medal and a bunch of stuff. And he was with the 1st Air Cav, and they really caught it, in Vietnam. And he got out, and he just basically, I just think he was trying to kill himself drinking. That's how he handled PTSD.
Trying to escape.
Yeah, escape. But a real hero in every sense of the word, and I just made sure his family knew it. So
that's important.
Yep.
That's really important, and it's just crazy. It's crazy to me. I don't have the personal experience, and I do feel like I have family members, like you said, I might not even realize that they served and what they have done because they didn't talk about it.
Didn't know.
And so it's just, especially living now where, like you said, it is more accepted, and it's like, okay, this is real. This isn't made up. And, people are coming back injured, and they can't just go back to a regular job. Maybe they are in a wheelchair now and they don't have legs and they can't go back to working a machine or whatever they were doing before they left. So I think there is a lot more support there, but it could always be more. There could always be more. There always should be more.
Yes.
So it's crazy. So what was your first job? I'm curious.
My first job?
Yes.
Well, I come from very humble beginnings. My parents were very poor, and I actually spent myself and I have 4 brothers. 3 of us spent time at St. Joseph's Home for Boys. Not everybody knows that about me, but we were poor. So when I was 8 years old, there was a magazine for kids called Grit, and you could order greeting cards and garden seeds, and they'd actually float you some credit. And I'd go door to door at 8 years old, and so I learned early to be able to deal with rejection, because not everybody wanted some 8-year-old there. But I was able to buy my own shoes and school books. So that was my first job, and then I worked for an egg farmer, or not an egg farmer, chicken farmer in Grass Lake. I don't know, he had 3 or 4 or 5,000 chickens in 2 different barns, and so that was a summer job when I was leaving the 8th grade. And so I'd go out there every day and pick up eggs and put them in baskets. My mother said, and we lived in the village, so he was about 2 miles outside the village, so my dad would usually take me out there, and I would walk home after work. And my mother would say, "Oh, I just hated to see you come home." I said, "Why?" She said, "Well, because you smelled like chicken, you know what?" And I did. I smelled. So I did.
It smelled like hard work.
Yeah. So then I worked at the Grass Lake newspaper for a little bit, and then I worked at the funeral home, Stormont Funeral Home, and probably my first real good role model were the Stormonts. They were very good folks, and small town. I started there in August, going into my junior year, and in the next month during homecoming, one of my classmates, there were 48 kids in our class, got killed in a car wreck right in front of the school. So I had to work that funeral, and that was very traumatic. And so, I worked there. Usually the funeral director would have a kid work 2 years and then move on and get another one. And so everybody that came through the door I knew. So
yeah, you started your network young.
Yeah, and I thought about being a funeral director, but
It's too morbid.
Well, I used to tell people that the funeral director told me that I should be in the people business, but I was too sensitive to be a funeral director. But it was because when I got into college zoology, I couldn't get it. I was more interested in the girls, so that's when I went in the Army. So I've done a lot of different things.
Interesting. You're a very interesting man.
Well, thank you.
Yes. Is there anything else you would like to touch on today?
Well, I'll talk a little bit very briefly about the real estate business, because we're in kind of a transitionary phase. The last 2 to 3 years has been gangbusters. It's been like nothing nothing that I've ever seen. And just complete insanity, because every listing I had were multiple offers and people bidding over list price. And so, of course, if you have a listing, and I'm primarily a listing broker, and you have 4 or 5 people that want to buy it, let's say 4 people that want to buy it, there's going to be 3 disappointed. And a lot of times they get mad at me, the listing. In fact, I had somebody put on Google, Bill White only cares about his seller. Well, that's what I'm the seller's agent. I am an advocate for the seller. Mm-hmm. So what happened is that people accepted the 3 and lower mortgage rates as reality, especially a lot of younger people that were driving the market. They don't remember the double-digit interest rates back in the early 80s, for example. So that became reality. So when they jumped up quickly to 7, everybody said, well, that's the end of the world. Well, it's not, because if you look back the last 50 years, 6-7% is about the average. So now they're starting to fall, and rates are falling. In fact, Howard Hanna just announced a 5% mortgage rate. And there's, depending on who you talk to, between 5 and 6 million residential housing units short in this country to meet the demand of the citizens. So that bodes well for a healthy market. It's just going to take people accepting the fact that rates are not going to go back to 3 and 2, I don't think, my humble opinion. So if they want to buy or sell or whatever, they need to do it. They can't hold back for it getting better. They just need to move on.
Yeah.
So that's kind of where we are.
Wow. Well, thank you for that insider information there.
Yes.
Well, awesome. I think this wraps up another episode of Harvesting Jackson's Best. Thank you to our listeners, and thank you, Bill, for joining us today.
It was a pleasure and a real honor to be asked.
Absolutely, and thank you for your service.
You're welcome.
We can't speak highly enough. You need to get down, check out the Military Heritage Museum. It's at 311 North Wisner Street. Check out their website and, get out there and educate yourself, especially about awesome people in Michigan that sacrificed and have really interesting stories. So thank you so much. You guys have a great day, and we will see you next week.